the live app. We want to go right to Andy Rosden, our correspondent who is in Louisville, Kentucky. Andy Rosden reports you've gotten that of at least 2 police officers shot tonight in these protests following the grand jury verdict on the Breonna Taylor case. Tell us the latest.
Well, what I can tell you, David, is that earlier, about 45 minutes ago or so, there was just a rush of police cars about a mile or so from the location where I'm at right now. And a police sergeant there, I asked him really quickly, hey, what's going on? Because we had heard that a police officer was shot. In fact, just before all those cars started racing down there, I bumped into a police officer who jumped into his car right after I talked to him. I said, what's going on? He said, an officer has been shot. And then he sarcastically said, yeah, peaceful protest out here. Then he raced down, and then at that location, about a mile away, I asked the sergeant, what's going on? What do we know? He said, possibly 3 officers shot. Pretty sure that 2 were shot. He said one was in bad shape, the other one was in better shape. But that's all I know at this moment from the scene. We're still waiting for more information about those officers' conditions and the circumstances behind this shooting.
Today, when there were reactions to the grand jury announcement, and we've got it on our screen now. Andy Rosen at the top, I'm in the middle, and then we have a reaction shot there below when people are hearing the news that the grand jury had decided to bring 3 counts of wanton endangerment to Officer Brett Hankinson, but not in connection with the shooting death of Breonna Taylor, rather because Officer Hankinson shot into a home next to Taylor's home. So essentially no charges related to the shooting death of Breonna Taylor. Tell us what the reaction was. You were in Louisville at the time. What did you hear? What did you see?
Well, it was interesting, David. I was right here at this square, this memorial that's been set up for Breonna Taylor. I'll kind of pan around, show you here. It's a flower and candle memorial that had been set up for days in advance. There are pictures of her here, and protesters were all gathered out here as the announcement was coming down. This is outside the Hall of Justice where I'm at right now. And just to give you an update, there's a massive police presence behind me back there. You might be able to see them all there in riot gear, just watching over just in case. Of course, we're well past curfew. But to get back to earlier today, when this announcement came down about these charges or no charges in this case, I was out here, and there were a lot of protesters who said, look, before the decision came down, they said, let's wait to see what Breonna Taylor's family says about it. We'll see what they say before we make a decision on whether or not this was a correct decision. Well, very quickly, the family came out and said that this was an outrageous, offensive decision by the grand jury, and marchers certainly took that cue. They were enraged, David. They started marching down the street here and through the streets of Louisville. Eventually, they came to a place a little bit outside of the downtown. There were some somewhat violent arrests, not terribly violent. Some protesters were dragged away in minor scuffles with police, and then a lot of the marchers wound up here at this location. Again, I'm going to pan back here. And again, police officers were all lined up as they are now, and marchers were yelling at them, shouting at them. And it got kind of peaceful after that, David. They marched for a while, they shouted, they even prayed for a while, and things got really quiet at this location, at this memorial. But then, around 8 o'clock or so, somebody started a fire back there at that Hall of Justice, just outside. The fire was quickly put out, but that started off more fires. Police came out briefly in riot gear to push the protesters away. Then the police retreated when they got hit by water bottles. And then police set off flash booms to clear out this square, this area, and that's when protesters went on the march. They started setting fires down the streets here. They've bashed at least a couple of glass bus station stops to pieces. They've damaged some windows. And then, David, it was about, I'd say around 8:30 or so, maybe 8:15 possibly, when we got the call, when we heard about these possible officer shot. And that's when all heck broke loose, to say the least. I was down there at the location where the officers were shot, and protesters were down there as well. One protester shouted from the street. He said, what happened? And an officer shouted back, an officer got shot. And the man on the street shouted back, well, now you know how Breonna Taylor felt. So it's been that kind of back and forth night through all this. Now I'm back at this square, this area where this all started. It's peaceful right now, David, but tense, certainly, with all those riot gear folks behind me, as you see there. And there's one lone man back there shouting, but quiet right now.
Understandable. We've got Andy Rosen reporting live from Louisville, Kentucky. If you've just joined us, you're joining us over HAPS TV. This is a live app, a terrific application for a lot of journalists to be able to use to talk to one another, literally from our home studios and through our iPhones. In addition to Andy Rosen, who's live on the scene in Louisville, Kentucky, where two police officers were shot tonight, hours after the grand jury came back with no charges against an officer in the shooting death of Breonna Taylor. In addition to the fires, of course, the two police officers shot approximately an hour or so ago. In addition to Andy Rosen, who was there on the scene in Louisville, Kentucky, I want to bring in Joe Williams from U.S. News and World Report, who was watching this from Washington, D.C. And Joe, what's your reaction to these images that we're seeing from Andy, the reports of the police officers being shot, the fires, bus stops being smashed? What goes through your mind?
Is 1968. I mean, this seems like we're back in the convulsion of trying to figure out exactly who we are as a nation. What also goes through my mind is that the Louisville city and civic leaders were preparing for this, and that they called in the National Guard, they called in extra police patrols, and businesses downtown boarded up windows, and it's almost like they were expecting violence. But also, you cannot escape the fact that police officers arrived in riot gear. They were ready for battle, one protester said, and that we also have a situation with roving gangs of people carrying long guns, according to Andy's report, carrying weapons and ammunition. It is a situation rife for tension, and it's a situation that anything could jump it off. We don't know very much about what happened to the officers who got shot. We don't know if it was connected to the protest or not. All indications are that it is a very serious situation, and even having outside people coming with guns, it's a powder keg, and it looks like someone's trying to light the match. Well, it's become an increasingly major part of these Black Lives Matter protests. As you mentioned, this happened way back in the winter, and